Hurricane Michael is already being called a Category 3. Thousands of people are under evacuation orders as we speak. It's bearing down on Florida's Panhandle. Hurricane Michael, again, has strengthened. First of all, it has been upgraded. Winds up to 110 miles an hour, while coastal areas are facing life-threatening storm surges of 12. Forecasters are warning the storm is likely to intensify beyond where it is right now with a lot higher winds. Here to break it all down is Paul Goodloe, meteorologist for the Weather Channel. Paul, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Roland. How are you doing this afternoon?
So here we go again. We're dealing with Hurricane Michael. We're dealing with what's happening, in Florida. We of course dealt with the hurricane that hit Puerto Rico, that hit the Virgin Islands. Now we're dealing with last year. Now we're dealing, of course, earlier this year, North Carolina. Now Florida is in the way. There's also concerns, potential damage to early voting locations, but also voting locations with election just 4 weeks away.
Well, hearing that they're going to extend the voting, that's good news because the state of Florida needs to send all the resources they can to deal with this. This is an emergency across the state. The state of emergency has been declared. So, again, this is a major hurricane, not something to be kind of sneeze at. And those that can afford to need to get out of harm's way. And a big issue with evacuations, and people get on people for not evacuating, but it costs money to evacuate, to pay for a hotel for 3 or 4 or 5 days, to have gas, to have fuel, to have food for maybe a family of 4. We're talking probably, $60 to $100 a meal for 3 meals a day. So it's expensive to evacuate, but people do need to evacuate. You need to weigh, okay, I put myself in debt versus I put myself in harm's way. We can always make more money. We can't make more people and make more memories that we have here. So the important thing is your evacuation zone to get out. You mentioned storm surge, 9 to 12 feet, and that is definitely possible. The Florida coastline, that part of the Panhandle, is very surge prone. There's a very shallow coastal shelf, which means you have a big, strong hurricane like Michael is. It creates its own kind of lifting of the ocean, and then you have waves on top of that, and then you have the winds coming in as well, pushing that wall of water even higher on shore. So the storm surge is a real threat across that region. And parts of the Florida Panhandle have beautiful beaches. And a lot of people flock there to vacation to live. So they are definitely in the evacuation zones. They need to head inland to higher ground. And we're talking that stretch. There are probably a couple of 100,000 people who live within 10 feet of sea level. So the risk is real there. And the winds as well. Unlike Florence came in very slowly. So Florence had time to entrain some drier air to kind of wind down. And at one point, Florence was a 4, made landfall as a Category 2. Michael is a Category 3, possibly maybe even Category 4 over the next within the next 24 hours when it makes landfall. It's moving quickly north at 12 miles per hour, so it is going to slam in there. So whatever winds you'll have, you can even add that 12 mile per hour forward speed to the winds. So we can definitely have catastrophic damage in some areas. The good news is, unlike Florence or a la Harvey last year, this thing comes in and keeps going. It's not going to stall out. We're not going to have days upon days of rain. But the swath, if you can put that up again, it's going to continue to move northward into Florida, into Georgia, and then into areas that were hit hard with Hurricane Florence, the low country of South Carolina, eastern North Carolina. They can bring that area a couple of more inches of rain, maybe in that 3 to 6 inch variety. Despite the fact that it's moving fast, it still is loaded with moisture and rain, and it could be wrung out there. So we have insult to injury. Many rivers are still running high across that area of eastern North Carolina and eastern and South Carolina as well. So a huge flood concern is up there inland, that's well away from the coastline from where Michael will make landfall. So we're talking now's the time to hopefully you are in, if you're in that zone, that you have left, or you have a sturdy structure to ride this thing out. And definitely there's going to be a swath of some damage and some power outages to last maybe a week or so. But the good news is, unlike Puerto Rico, we can quickly get resources in there through the arterial roads around the area. But to hear that people are coming up with a voter deadline, I always encourage everyone to vote. But at this point, they need to put these resources into protecting people's lives and then push the deadline back and then get back to normal. Hopefully in a week to 5 days, things will be back to somewhat normal in that area directly impacted by Hurricane Michael.
We can pull that slide back up, Paul, as I look at it right here on my iPad. What is the impact? We're focusing on the Florida Panhandle, but what about those folks who are there in Alabama? Because obviously what that red line is, that whole Gulf Coast region right there, certainly those folks are also going to be impacted.
Definitely. Parts of what they call lower Alabama, the Dothan area, as well to the south and east of Montgomery. Montgomery will get their fair share of cloud cover, some rain showers, and maybe some gusty, strong winds, but nothing unlike perhaps a stormy thunderstorm afternoon across that part of kind of central and south central Alabama. But lower Alabama also will see some pretty intense impacts. Now, the hurricane still remains rather small, so we're talking about a lot of the impacts have always been on the east side and the northeast side of the system. So areas of Tallahassee, maybe even towards Gainesville, might have more impact than, say, in Montgomery, Alabama will be, even though they might be technically closer to the center. But if you look at this map and look at the right side, at the right front quadrant, things rotate counterclockwise. That's when you have more of the winds coming directly off the ocean. You're going to have a greater tornado threat pretty close to that center, especially on the east side where it makes landfall as well. So Gainesville, even maybe to Jacksonville, there are probably greater threats there, including tornadoes, than, say, Montgomery and Birmingham. So that's good news for them, but not as great news for areas along northern Florida and east area Panhandle. Then into parts of southern Georgia. Atlanta, they'll have some impacts. They'll have some gusty winds. Can't rule out some down power lines. But a lot of people don't realize the geography and topography of this area of the U.S. There are a lot of pine trees, and pine is not the strongest wood out there by far. So we're going to have a lot of these pine trees coming down, bringing power lines down, threatening to cover roads, threatening to hit homes as well. So we say to take that swath seriously. We're going to have some pretty intense winds because this thing is going to move quickly. It's not going to have time to wind down and slowly make landfall. It's hitting pretty hard, and it's keep trucking right on through southern Georgia, into middle Georgia, into low country of South Carolina, Columbia. Definitely going to be impacted as well with very strong winds. A lot of trees in this part of the southeast, including Florida, a lot of pine trees, a lot of trees that might be weakened from previous year's drought, but definitely something to keep in mind if you live next to a lot of tall trees.